Well, hello to our viewers. I'm here to talk a little bit about Carnival in Dominica and how we used to celebrate, how we celebrate today. In fact, before Carnival was called Carnival in Dominica, it was called Masquerade. And that was because most of the revelers on the streets used to wear masks. Carnival or Masquerade started since the time of emancipation, when our African ancestors, the freed enslaved Africans, took to the streets in celebration. They would use a lot of goat skin drums. In Dominica we call it lapo cabwit. They used sensei in those days, but in the olden days they made the sensei out of a plant, a type of sisal plant called langbeth. They would, of course, cut the plant, they would pound the plant. Some people say they would soak the plant in seawater, and then they would put it out in the sun to dry and get it bleached, and then fray out the plant or the langbeth and use it to make the senses. So that was many, many years ago. But since then, as the masquerade began to progress and move on and move forward, revelers started to use rope, then they started to use crocus bag, cloth, also sugar and flour bags, and paper as well. So today in Dominica you find senses made out of various types of material. And from the 1920s, the traditional masquerade became a little more organized into bands. So you find bands of sensi, bands of darkies, and the darkies would use charcoal to blacken their skin. So all the revelers in that band would be very, very black. And you had the red version to that called the red ochre, where they would use, it's a type of plant that produces a red pod. And they, of course, would crush that red pod and make a type of powder and use it to rub their skins. So they would appear to be very red, and that band would be called red ochre. And then you had other costumes like Suswell Sui, which is a type of costume with large wings, giving the appearance of a large bat. Hence the name Suswell Sui, because in Creole a bat is referred to as Suswell Sui. Other costumes like cowboy and Indians and so on, and then characters like the bois bois or stilt walkers, which is also found in other parts of the Caribbean. So it was about the 1950s that we saw the introduction of what we call the more modern type of carnival, like the queen pageants, the calypso competitions, and steel band, which was introduced to Dominica in the late 1950s. And then the word carnival started now to be used to describe the festival, which of course leads up to the 2 days of jump up before Lent, Carnival Monday and Tuesday, Lundi Gras, Mardi Gras. And before that you will have the Carnival Queen shows, you'll have the Calypso shows, and so. So the jump up that would take place on the streets in the 50s and 60s and 70s would mainly be the lapo cabwit, which would be the goat skin drums, and the steel band music. Those were the two very popular types of music at the time. Since then, from the 1980s, the hi-fi or the speakers, the music speakers, were introduced on huge trucks, and the main music that was played and still played today would be bouillon, apart from calypso. Calypso is still very popular on the roads at carnival time, and so is the bouillon, and of course you have the lapo cabwit in between. Steel band is still alive in Dominica, but not so popular on the streets right now, although we are trying to see if we can revive steel band for jump up on the streets. So Carnival is a wonderful and beautiful showcase right today of a combination of the traditional expressions like the sensei, like the Suswell Sui. You have the big bottom women, you have the Bois, you have the Suswell Sui. And then you also have the modern costume bands where the creativity comes in. So there's a lot of glitter and glitz and colorful costumes as well that one can describe as the more modern or contemporary expression. But of course these bands started appearing in Carnival since the 60s. So since that time, for decades, we have had both the modern and contemporary costumes along with the traditional expressions, which include the traditional costumes and the traditional drumming, like the Lapo Cabwe. Now the Kalinago, who were the first settlers in Dominica, are still in Dominica today. They live in an area called the Kalinago Territory, and they too have their own style of carnival and costumes. There's a particular costume that they have called the Tet Mas, where they use a lot of stripped crepe paper. They make a type of a headpiece, they design a headpiece and use a lot of stripped crepe paper falling from the head onto their faces, onto their backs. There's another costume where they use a lot of grass skirts as well. That is another type of costume that the Kalinago use. And of course with their Lapo Cabwe drums, they use a lot of Lapo Cabwe drums, and they do their own chanting. That was another popular type of music in the 50s and 60s in particular, a type of chanting called Chante Mas, where a woman would be leading the band and she would have her back, she'd be going forward with her face towards the crowd, and she was going forward but backwards. She'd be facing the crowd. She would be belting out the main verse, and then the crowd would respond in song in the chorus. It was called Chante Mas. It was a popular type of music at the time, before the loud speakers and the loud music and the loud bands became popular. So today you find a lot of bands on the road like Triple K and WCK and Swinging Stars, and they're on big trucks and they have their big speakers, and they're really blasting out some loud music, especially bouillon and then calypso as well in between. And of course you still have the Lapo Cabwe. Carnival many years ago used to be organized by the JC's organization. That was around the 1960s, 1970s. And then following the Hurricane David, the Cultural Division, which was newly established, took over the organization of Carnival. So the Cultural Division organized Carnival in the 1980s up to about 1997, when the Dominica Festivals Committee was established, and they were given the responsibility for Carnival and the World Creole Music Festival. So today the Dominica Festivals Committee is responsible for organizing Carnival. But Carnival still remains very, very popular among all age groups. In Carnival today you have shows for children like the Princess Show, you have a children's costume parade, you have the youth, like shows like the Teenage Pageant, which takes place every year and it's among the secondary schools. And you also have the Junior Calypso Monarch competition, which also contestants come from the various secondary schools. And then you have the shows where you have older participants, like the Carnival Queen Show, the Calypso Monarch competition, and there's a special pageant now organized by the Dominica State College as well. Apart from other activities across Dominica. Now Roseau, the capital, you find all the main shows that I spoke about. However, there are what we call smaller carnivals in other communities in Dominica, such as Grand Bay, St. Joseph, Maho, Portsmouth, Salisbury, Kalinago Territory, among other places. So you find you could go to, travel to one of the smaller communities, and you would find them having carnival activities there as well. But Roseau is the sort of central celebration of Carnival in Dominica. So most of the tourists who come, most of the visitors gravitate towards Roseau so that they could participate in the carnival there. On Carnival Monday now, you have the school bands, the school costume bands in the mornings. You also have the traditional parade with the traditional costumes, the sensei, suswansui. In the afternoons, there's a t-shirt presentation where groups come out in t-shirts, and you have a lot of the modern bands coming out and playing music. And on Carnival Tuesday, you have the very, very colorful costume bands coming out, the creative costume bands coming out, and practically for the whole day on Tuesday. And the thing about Dominica's Carnival is that after a certain hour in the afternoon, it becomes real spontaneous, where the whole crowd onlookers, anybody can join in what we call the jump up. So literally everybody can take part in the jump up after a while until 10 o'clock in the evening on both Monday and Tuesday. So I want to invite all of you viewing, if you have not been to Dominica's Carnival, to come and be part of the carnival, come and experience what the festival is like. I'm sure you will enjoy it, and I'm sure you'll find lots of shows, activities within the carnival that you would enjoy, and plus you would really enjoy the jump up and the parades. Thank you very much for watching, and take care. Bye-bye.